The frost still lay blue in the long shadow of the barn when Vernon Plick's voice cracked out over the lot like a whip going loose. "And that's the last of it, gentlemen, the very last, so don't go warming up your feet just yet. Lot 41. He swept his straw boater toward the squat black shape on the two-plank skid at his feet, and the ring of townmen turned to look, breath fogging in front of their good hats. One cast iron cider press, seized up tighter'n a banker's fist. Screw won't turn, throats packed solid, no good for cider, no good for scrap, and I'd not want to be the man who tries to lift it. Who'll give me $1, $1, to haul the eyesore off the widow Holleran's grass?" Nobody said a word. Somewhere a horse stamped, and the sound carried clean across the cold. The press sat there squat and rust-streaked, the size of a hog and near the color of dried blood, its great screw frozen at half-throw the way it had frozen the day the mill went quiet. A skin of frost still clung to the north face of it where the sun hadn't reached. Earl Taskett stood at the back of the ring with his hat in his good hand and his short hand pushed down in his coat pocket, and he did not mean to bid on anything. He had come because Delpha said a man ought not sit home the day they sold off the place where he'd spent his life, that it would look like hiding, and Earl had put on the brown canvas coat gone shiny at the elbows and driven the rust-freckled Ford out to the Halloran barn lot to stand in the cold and watch other men carry off the tools his hands had worn smooth. He'd watched the sorting tables go, and the grading belt, and the good oak barrels, each one knocked down to a fellow from town who'd never pressed a drop of cider in his life. He had not raised his hat once. He'd only stood there, quiet, the way he was quiet, and let it happen. But the crowd was thinner now, and colder, and mean the way a crowd gets mean when it's been standing too long in the frost with nothing left to want. When Plick called the press, a low ripple of laughing went through them, not loud, just knowing, the laugh of men glad to have a thing to look down on at the end of a long, dull afternoon. "Come now," Plick sang, milking it, boater tipping. 20 years that machine made cider for this county. Somebody here drank it. $1. Ain't worth the gas to haul it, a voice called, and the laugh came up warmer. Earl knew that press better than he knew most men. He'd stood over it summer and winter for 20 years, felt the throat fill and the pomace bleed and the sweet run come pale and cloudy down the trough. He'd cleaned it and greased it and cursed it. And one October morning when he was 34 and moving too quick the top gear had caught his left hand and taken the tip of his ring finger clean off before he could so much as shout. He'd wrapped it in his own shirt-tail, finished the pressing, and driven himself to the doctor after. The press had a piece of him in it. There was not another soul on the lot could say that. 9 weeks that thing sat here, a man near the front said, loud enough to carry. It was Clyde Mersch, oiled hair shining under his hat brim, the brass town council pin catching the low sun. He ran the estate for the bank, and he stood with his thumbs in his vest like a man who owned the cold air itself. Since old Silas went. Nobody wanted it then, nobody'll want it now. Torch it for the iron and be done. That got a chuckle. Mersch let it. He was the sort who fed on a chuckle. Earl looked at the press and thought about the words that had gone around town those 9 weeks, the words that started the same afternoon Silas Halloran was found dead in his own orchard with his heart quit under him. The mill closed inside the week, and when the hands went to the office for the season's back pay, a whole autumn's wages, cash, the way Silas had always paid, cash out of the iron box because he trusted the county bank about as far as he could throw the building, Clyde Mersch had stood in that same office with the ledgers open and said, flat as a plank, that the money was not there. Was not in the books. Never had been. Said the season's pay simply did not exist, and if the men had marked down more hours than they'd worked, well, that was between them and their conscience. There'd been no box, no cash, no record Mersch would own to. And because a dead man can't testify, and a bank foreman with a council pin can, the town had done its arithmetic and come up believing the workers. Half believing, anyway, which in a small county is worse, the kind of half that follows a man into the feed store and goes quiet when he walks up. Padded their hours, folks murmured. Trying to squeeze a dead man. Earl had felt that half-belief on the back of his neck for 9 weeks, and he'd said nothing, because there was nothing a quiet man could say against it. Last call on a hunk of scrap, Plick was saying, and his eye moved over the ring and landed, the way an auctioneer's eye will, on the one man not laughing. Nobody? Not even the man who used to sweat over it? The whole lot turned to look at Earl. He did not decide to do it. That was the thing he'd try to explain to Delpha later, and never quite manage. He didn't reckon the cost or weigh the winter, or think of the tablet where she kept their accounts. He only saw the press sitting there in the frost with a piece of his own hand ground into its gears, and he saw the scrap furnace it was headed for, and the whole afternoon of laughing men. And something in his chest that had been folded down small for 9 weeks would not let the old machine go off to be melted to laughter. He raised his hat. "There's $1. Plick crowed. Delighted, the sentimental gentleman opens at $1. Do I hear 2? 2, said Clyde Mersch, and grinned, and did not look at the press at all. He looked at Earl. He had no more use for a broken cider press than he had for a second nose. He bid to watch. 3 here. That was one of the town men beside Mersch, a fellow named Pruitt, who sold seed and feed and had a laugh you could hear across a fairground. He caught Mersch's eye, and something passed between them, a little sport to warm the end of a cold day. Or say 5. $5, Vernon, 5. Earl's jaw tightened. He raised his hat again. 6, said Pruitt, before Plick could even ask, and now the ring understood the game, and it was a fine game, running the stoop-shouldered press hand up $1 at a time for a thing not worth a dime, watching him flinch and raise his hat and flinch again. 10, then a jump to 20, Mersch calling it lazy over his shoulder. Then Pruitt, sly. 30, Vernon. Don't let the man rob us. The laughing had a rhythm to it now, coming up on every bid like a warm, cruel tide, and Earl stood in the middle of it, with his hat going up and the frost creeping into his boots. He knew what was in his pocket. He'd known before he came. $95, folded soft. The last of it. The whole of what stood between the taskets and the white middle of winter, with no mill wages coming. Delpha had counted it into his hand that morning without a word, because she'd known he'd need to feel like a man who could still pay for a thing. 50. Pruitt sang, playing to the ring. 60, Mersch drawled. They'd have gone all afternoon if he'd let them. Up, and then dropped out laughing at the top and left him nothing to buy. Earl saw that plain. So he did the only thing that would end it. He took his hat off his head, held it flat against his chest a moment like a man at a graveside, and said, in the quiet, slow voice that made the ring lean in to hear, $95. It landed like a stone in a pond. For half a breath there was nothing. Then the laugh broke, the biggest of the whole cold afternoon, a warm, roaring wave of it, men slapping their thighs, Pruitt bent double, Mersch's grin gone wide as a gate. $95. For a paperweight. For a hunk of frozen iron a man couldn't give away. Plick let it roll a good long while, because a laugh like that is money to an auctioneer. And then he banged the little gavel down on his board. Sold. Sold, by heaven, to the sentimental gentleman at the back, $95, cash, for a paperweight the size of a hog. And the ring laughed again, harder, at the sweet round number of the fool. Earl walked up through the middle of it to pay. He counted the bills into Plick's hand one at a time, soft worn bills warm from his pocket, and Plick counted them again for the crowd, holding each one up. Earl took his receipt and folded it and put it away and did not look at any man's face, and the faces watched him go, still grinning, waiting for him to color up. He didn't. He just walked, stoop-shouldered, back toward the flatbed where his wife stood waiting. Delpha had watched the whole of it from beside the Ford, thin arms crossed over the faded house dress under her coat, apron corner showing at the hem. She'd seen the laugh land on her husband's back like a thrown thing. She saw the $95 go out of his pocket. Their $95. The number she'd written in the school tablet not 2 hours past. The number that was supposed to buy flour and coal in the long white middle of the year. Her mouth went tight and thin. But she did not say one word to shame him in front of those men. She only reached back and dropped the tailgate with a bang, and said, low, so only he could hear it, then let's get it home before dark. It took 2 boys and $4 to load it. Earl paid them out of what little was left, and even so the thing near beat all 3 of them. It came up the planks an inch at a time, the boys grunting, and Earl heaving from the low side with his good hand and the heel of his short one. The cast iron so cold it burned to touch. When at last it slid onto the bed, the whole Ford sank on its springs and groaned, and the chains they threw over it to hold it fast creaked when they drew them tight. One of the boys knocked a chain hook against the press to seat it, and the machine gave back a sound. Earl heard it and stopped. It was not the sound iron ought to make. A solid casting that size, hit with a hook, ought to ring, a hard bright note that ran up your arm and hung in the air. This was duller than that. Packed, a close, muffled thump, the sound of something wrapped tight around a fullness, the way a full barrel answers different from an empty one. He stood a moment with his short hand flat on the frozen top of it, waiting, but the sound didn't come again. And he could not for the life of him place why a thing choked with nothing but old rust should sound so full. He let it go. There was light to lose. They drove home slow, the load riding low and the springs complaining over every frost-heaved rut. The sun going down orange and small behind the black orchard rows, and the cold coming up hard behind it. Delpha sat close against him with her hands in her lap. Neither of them talked for a good long while, the heater ticking, the press a dark weight behind them. I can't tell you why I done it, Earl said at last, watching the road. I know what it cost. I know you can't, she said. That was all. She was not a woman to twist a knife once it was in. After a mile she added, quieter, looking at the fields, you couldn't leave it to be laughed at. I saw, and she put her cold hand over his short one on the wheel, over the place where the fingertip wasn't, and left it there the rest of the way home. By the time they turned in at the yard it was full dark and hard frost, the stars come out sharp and close the way they only do on the cold clear nights, and the tin roof of the shed was already going white. They chained the press down off the tailgate and let it stand on the dirt floor of the shed where it landed, too heavy to move another foot, and Delpha went into the stove and left him to it. Earl lit the kerosene lamp and hung it on the nail. It caught and studied and threw its yellow ring out over the cold machine, and the shadows of the great screw stretched long and black up the boards. He stood looking at it a while, his breath smoking in the lamplight, the crowds laughing, still going in his ears, that whole warm, cruel wave of it, $95, the sentimental gentleman. Sold. Then he took his coat off and rolled his sleeves and reached down the good heavy wrench from its hook on the wall. If they'd not let him keep his pride, he'd at least give the old thing back its use. He'd free the screw. He'd make it turn again if it was the last thing his hands did that winter. He fit the wrench to the frozen head, set his boots, and leaned. The screw gave up its last quarter turn with a shriek that ran clear up Earl's arm and into his teeth, and this time it did not bind on rust. He felt it, a soft catch, a give. The wrench pulling through something that was not iron and was not stone. He stopped. The kerosene lamp hissed on the workbench behind him, throwing his own broad shadow up onto the tin roof. And out past the shed walls the October frost had come down hard and blue, the kind of cold that makes a man's breath hang. He set the wrench down. His knuckles had opened again where the frost-stiff metal had bitten them, and he wiped the blood on his canvas coat without looking at it, the way he'd done for 20 years, and put both hands flat on the top plate of the press, and felt the whole squat thing under his palms like it was something with a held breath in it. The blowtorch had done its work on the seized threads, and the penetrating oil had crept in overnight down every rusted seam. Earl worked the top plate now with a flat bar, easing it, prying at the edges where Silas Halloran's iron had been fitted a lifetime ago. It came grudging. A skin of rust flaked and fell. And when the plate lifted at last with a groan and a puff of old dry air, Earl leaned the lamp close and looked down into the throat of the press where 20 years of apples had been crushed to gold, and he did not see rust. He saw wax. Dark, hard, poured wax, the color of an old candle, sealing the bore like a cork seals a bottle. He set his thumbnail against it, and it was firm as horn. That was the wrongness he'd half heard on the drive home. The duller sound when the chain knocked, not solid iron, but iron packed with something and sealed against the seasons. Earl's slow mind turned it over. A man did not pour wax into a working press by accident. A man did that to keep the weather out, to keep something dry. He worked the wax loose with the flat bar and the point of his knife, and under the wax was oilcloth, waxed and folded tight. The good tarred kind a careful man kept for wrapping seed and papers. His hands had gone unsteady. He told himself it was the cold. He lifted the first oilcloth packet out of the throat of the press and laid it in the yellow ring of the lamp and unfolded it with fingers that had gone clumsy, the short one that lacked its tip aching the way it always ached when the frost was deep. And inside the oilcloth was a folded paper gone soft at the creases, and it was a deed. The orchard deed. Silas Halloran's name on it in the county's own hand, the 60 acres and the mill and the barn lot Earl had loaded this very press off of that afternoon while the townmen laughed. Folded with the deed was a second paper, and this one was in Halloran's own hand. That cramped, careful writing Earl had seen 100 times on pay slips and feed orders. A will. Simple, plain witnessed, it left the mill and the land clear. And it named things and it named men. And even reading slow Earl could see it was not the will Clyde Mersch had stood up at the courthouse and filed. It was not that will at all. He sat down on the upturned crate by the bench because his legs had gone uncertain under him. The lamp hissed. Somewhere out in the frost a dog barked once and quit. Earl reached back into the press. The second thing was heavier, and it was canvas, a payroll pouch gone stiff with cold, and he knew the weight of it before he had it clear. Knew it the way a man knows the heft of a full feed sack from an empty one. His heart was going hard now. He worked the buckle and folded back the flap, and the lamp caught on money. Banded cash, the bills soft and worn and counted, band after band of it laid in tight. The season's back pay. The money Clyde Mersch had stood in that courthouse and swore up and down, with his oiled hair and his brass council pin catching the light, simply was not in the books, had never existed, had been dreamed up by grasping mill hands padding their hours. It existed. It was here, in Earl's 2 scarred hands, in the throat of a press the whole county had laughed at for $95. Tucked against the cash was a paper list, and Earl held it to the lamp and read the names. Every hand at Halloran's mill, down the left in Silas's cramped hand, and beside each name the hours owed and the money owed, tallied honest. Bickle, Renner, Tovey, Ott, the Delp boy who'd worked 1 green season. And there, in the middle of the column, no bigger and no smaller than any other man's, Tasket, E, and the figure beside it. The wages of a hard-closed season that Delpha had already grieved over in her school tablet ledger and marked as gone. He did not feel glad, not yet. What he felt first was a kind of shaking anger for all of it, for the 9 weeks of it, for the town half believing, for the men who'd worked the season honest and been called liars in their own home county with no way on earth to prove different. He had to set the list down on his knee to steady it. There was one thing left in the press. Earl reached in the third time and drew out the last packet, and this was the smallest, and the wax on it was thickest, as if the man who sealed it had cared most about this one lasting. Ledger pages. Halloran's own accounts, ruled and dated, and clipped to them a note, and Earl read the ledger first, slow. And though he was no bookkeeper, he could follow a column of figures the way any working man can follow what he's owed, and he saw it plain as the frost on the window. Money in one column that never came to rest in the next, the mill's accounts bled off a little at a time into the banks, month on month, and beside the bleeding, again and again, one hand's initials setting the transfers down. C. M. Clyde Mersch. Silas Halloran had caught the bank's own foreman skimming the mill dry, quiet, over years, and had written it down, and had signed it, and had kept it. The note clipped atop was short. Earl read it 3 times by the hissing lamp, and the third time his eyes had gone hot and blurred and he had to stop. Whoever frees this old press has an honest back and no fear of hard work. And that is the man I want to find this. Mersch at the bank has been robbing this mill for years, and I have got it down here in my own hand. The men earned every cent in this pouch. Pay them what the list says, name by name. Don't let the bank tell you otherwise. Silas Halloran. Earl sat a long time. The lamp burned. His breath smoked in the cold shed, and the tin roof ticked as the frost worked at it, and he thought about the man, dead 9 weeks now, who had not trusted the county bank an inch, and had trusted instead the one thing in this whole world no thief would ever bother to force, the seized solid press that was no good for cider, no good for scrap. The eyesore, the paperweight, the size of a hog. Silas had hidden the truth, and the men's wages in the belly of the machine that had taken the tip of Earl's own finger 20 years back, and had left it to be found by whatever man cared enough to make the old thing work again. And of all the county, on a cold afternoon, with the whole barn lot laughing at his back, it had been Earl Tasket who raised his hat and would not let it go for scrap laughter. He got up. He went to the shed door and opened it on the hard, clear night, the stars close and sharp the way they only are in a deep frost, and he called across the yard toward the yellow-lit kitchen window in a voice that came out rougher than he meant. Delpha, Delpha, come out here. She came in her coat over the house dress, her breath a small cloud, her face already braced. He knew that braced look. It was the look she'd worn 9 weeks now, the look of a woman doing sums against a winter with no wages in it. He didn't try to say it. He put the note in her hands and held the lamp up so she could read Silas Halloran's writing for herself. She read it once. Then she read it again, her lips moving, and her hand came up slow and pressed flat over her mouth, and above her fingers her sharp, tired eyes filled and shone in the lamplight. She looked at the open press. She looked at the banded cash laid on the bench and the list beside it. She did not say anything for a while. When she did, all she said was, "Earl," and then, "These are all the men. This is all of them. All of them," he said. Every hand. Their whole season. He watched her look at the pouch, and he knew what 9 weeks of the tablet ledger had done to her, the columns that would not add to enough, and he loved her the more for what she did not do. She did not reach for it. Neither of them did. Earl counted it out there on the workbench in the lamplight instead, slow, against Silas's paper list, name by name, hour by hour, laying each man's share in its own little stack, and when he came to task it, he counted his own out no fuller than the rest and set it in its place in the row, one stack among many, and it looked right there, and it would have looked wrong any other way. He did not sleep much. Before it was fairly light he had the deed and the will and the ledger pages and the note wrapped clean in the oilcloth again. And the rust-freckled 52 Ford warmed and grumbling in the cold, and Delpha beside him on the bench seat with the papers on her lap held in both hands. He did not drive to the bank. He did not go near Clyde Mersch. He drove to the county seat, and he carried it up the courthouse steps to the sheriff and asked, in his quiet, slow way, for the circuit judge to see it too, and then he laid it all out on the oak table and let the papers speak. Because they were in Silas Halloran's own hand, and they needed no help from a press hand who was slow with words. They did speak. It did not take long once men who could read a ledger set their eyes to it. Clyde Mersch's own initials were on every crooked transfer, month on month on month, and the will he'd filed was not the will in the dead man's hand, and the money he'd sworn never was had been sitting sealed in wax inside an iron press that sold for $95 while he stood in the front row and snorted. The setting right of it was public, and it was quiet, and it happened where the wrong had. They counted the payout on the Halloran barn lot on the same cold, packed ground where the crowd had laughed a week before. The men came in their work coats, hats in their hands, and Earl gave each his own envelope off Silas's list, name by name. Bickle, Renner, Tovey, Ott. The Delp boy. Every man his season's wage that the county had called a lie, put into his own hand where he stood. There was not much said. Some of the men could not say anything at all. A few of the town men who had run Earl up $1 at a time that day to watch him flinch stood off at the edge of the lot, with their good hats in their hands now, and their eyes down. And no one troubled them. And that was its own kind of answer. Clyde Mersch's brass council pin came off his coat, and his story came apart the same week under Silas Halloran's own writing. And the county, that had half believed him, did not believe him any longer. Earl took the press home. He freed it the rest of the way, cleaned the throat, honed the old screw, set new oak in where the years had chewed it. And by the time the last of the season's late apples came in, the mill lamp was lit again in the evenings, and the wheel was turning. He stood at the screw where he had stood 20 years, bearing down with his 9 good fingers and the one gone short. And the press took the apples and bore down in its turn. And out of the throat that had held a dead man's honest bookkeeping and a winter's worth of wages there ran now, sweet and steady into the waiting crock, a bright channel of new cider, gold-colored in the lamplight, the last thing the old press had been holding back. That night Delpha turned up the lamp at the kitchen table and opened her school tablet and set the columns straight. The winter figured and the winter met. The two of them square and warm and provided for, and under it in her small even hand she wrote the men's names, every one, and after them, at last, the word that the whole county had finally come round to, paid